Welcome to the Courageously Unconventional podcast. This week on the show, I am joined by special guest Priyanka Venugopal. I met Priyanka several years ago when I was working as a coach for physicians who wanted to lose weight. It was such a joy to coach her, and it has been so fun and inspiring for me to watch her over the years go from practicing as a physician to becoming an entrepreneur. So you're going to hear more about her story today about leaving medicine and creating the Unstoppable Mom Brain coaching business, where she helps high-achieving professional moms lose weight without a calculator and create more sustainable ease at work and home. So what really stands out to me about Priyanka's story is that she wasn't burned out when she left medicine. She actually used coaching to love her work more, but she just decided to go toward what was lighting her up in life even more than that, having her own coaching practice. And what her story really highlights is that you don't have to be burned out or hate things to change your life. And this goes for any area of your life, not just your job. I know we've been talking about that a lot on the podcast lately, but it's okay to want to change things just because you want to change them. It doesn't mean that that change doesn't come with doubt, uncertainty, sadness, grief, lots of other emotions. Any transition will include those things. You just work through those things on your way forward. And we talk about that on the podcast today. We also talk about how Priyanka has worked through her all-or-nothing perfectionist thinking to embrace change and uncertainty that comes with living and working unconventionally. We talk about using your intuition to guide your decisions. We also talk about how to reverse engineer your decision-making process by flash forwarding to the future. So enjoy this conversation with Priyanka Venugopal. All right, welcome back to the Courageously Unconventional podcast. Today, I have a special guest on the show, Priyanka Venugopal. Priyanka, thanks for coming on the podcast.
I am so thrilled to be here, Lynn. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, and then we'll dive right in.
I love it. So I am a board certified ObGyn turned weight loss coach for high achieving working moms. And I have adored Lynn for years. And so when I discovered, Lynn, that you were doing this podcast and you were like, does anyone have an unconventional story? I immediately messaged you like, yes, me. I would love to share my story. And I feel like you were definitely a part of it, especially in the coaching that you and I did together. So I just really love unconventional stories, specifically because I think that it lets people experiment with getting off the treadmill of, what we are conventionally taught is the quote unquote right way to be. So that's what I do now. I stopped practicing medicine a year and a half ago completely, which was a huge deal for me personally because I didn't leave from burnout. I wasn't one of those physicians, and I know there's so many physicians that are just overworked and burned out. I left simply because I felt more transformation as being a coach. I just loved it more. And so that's been my journey, leaving medicine at some point along the way and then starting to become a full-time entrepreneur.
Well, and that's what I just remember distinctly about meeting you. So I was in a position where I was coaching you and amongst other coaches being involved too. But you just took to coaching right away. What was it like first being coached?
Yeah. I think, first of all, I think it's important to say that I didn't know what coaching was until I just heard about it one day. I would think I was just in a Facebook group. And at the time I weighed a little over 200 pounds. I had 2 kids. My youngest was 7 months old. And I just was kind of at that place in my life where I had this good on paper life. I was a physician finally after years of study and trying, and I had a supportive husband and these 2, cute kids that annoyed me half the time. But I just felt frustrated. And I think that the kind of underlying theme was is this it? I've worked really hard. This is supposed to be it. And I think I felt really deeply frustrated that I had such trouble with weight loss and feeling comfortable in my body. And I was on Facebook and somebody mentioned, hey, have you heard about coaching? And somebody mentioned weight loss and coaching. And that was when I just heard about coaching for the very first time. And I just went down the rabbit hole of even understanding and learning that, wait a second, the results that I have in my life, both on the scale, at work, and at home, are not just because of me being disciplined or not. It was coming so much from my thoughts. And I was so ready to have different results in my life that's why I think I came into coaching and into the coaching experience with this eagerness. That's what it was. I was so eager to better my life, to level up the areas that I wanted more results in. And I think that that's maybe what you might have experienced with me as a client is I just was so eager. Like if I got coaching, I was like open to the coaching. Even if it felt tough, I was like, I'm here for it. Like I'm just ready and willing to change. And I think that that's why I had so much success with it.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right. I do remember the eagerness. And there was always, like, it doesn't surprise me that your story has led you to like transitioning into running your own company because there was something about the way that you took to coaching, though, where it seemed to light something up in you that it's like when it lights you up that much and it helps you out so much, it's hard to ignore, even if like everything else in your life is just like, no, stay in your on the paper, beautiful life. Like, why would you ever change from being an OBGYN to anything else? Like, I just remember you being so lit up. Like, it doesn't surprise me, but it doesn't mean it isn't hard to like change
Mhm.
up from that.
Yeah. And I think that a lot of it for me in it was even a struggle to consider it was because I didn't hate my job. I think that, a lot of people might leave their previous professions. And for me, it was being a physician to becoming a coach because they hate their job. And for me, that wasn't the case. I think what happened is when I started getting coached and I started experiencing small shifts. I think for me, it started as a mom. So my
Mm.
son was, I think, one of the first topics that I got coached on. He was
Yeah.
3 at the time. He drove me crazy. I wanted him to be different than he was. I was like, why can't he just be like the other kids? I mean, I had so many thoughts. I wish I was doing more for him and I wish he was different. And I think that me getting coached on that part of my life, this is totally separate from weight loss, but
Hmm.
me getting coached as, on my life as a mom changed me as a mom. And it changed our relationship, like me and my son. And to me, I think I felt the gravity of that. I felt the gravity of me changing my relationship with my son. This is a lifetime of change that now he gets to experience. We just changed the trajectory of our family just because of coaching.
Yeah.
And I think what started to happen, and this wasn't intentional, it wasn't like a conscious thing, it was like very subconscious and slow burning, is I started to see different parts of my life start to shift like that. So it definitely started first as a mom, then as a wife. I remember like, me and my husband are polar opposites. I started to just like change how I showed up in the relationship. Definitely me as a physician. And then of course, weight loss, I lost so much weight without counting points and calories and all of that. And I think that I started to feel the impact of it trickle into every corner of my life, and it was so hard to ignore. And then I
Hmm.
started bringing that practice and that way of being to my practice as a physician. Like I would kind of have this half, and I also have to say, I kind of think I've always been a coach. I didn't have the title of coach, but I think I've always had a coach's heart. And so when I started getting coached, actually, I was like, oh, this is a thing. There's a way to do this. And I started to fold some of that into my practice as a physician. So it felt very natural for me.
Hmm. Yeah, I imagine your patients started noticing it pretty quickly. It's
Yeah.
like when you're treated differently, you're just like, wait, what is happening here? Like how, like what is this relationship? So, but I do think it's worth talking about that part of like not being burnt out in order to change things. Cause I know I've had moments in my life too where I'm just like, I wish things would just get really terrible in order for me to change it. And then taking a step back and being like, oh wait, or you could just decide to change. But like what like I imagine a lot went into that transition from having like an established practice to then becoming, like having your coaching practice. So like what was that like for you?
Yeah. So I first discovered coaching in 2019. And then started my business in 2020, The Unstoppable Mom Brain. And my plan when I first started Unstoppable was not to leave my job. My plan at the time was like, because again, I mean, to be honest, there was some sunk cost fallacy situation happening where I'm like, I spent decades becoming a physician. Like there was not even a thought in my mind to leave, but I just was like, this coaching thing is pretty phenomenal and pretty amazing. And how fun would it be to specifically work with high achievers and working moms, basically like people like me. I really identified as a high achiever and a working mom. And it's like, I want to really help those people. So initially for quite a while, so I started my business in 2020. For almost 2 years, I was doing both. I was practicing as a physician and I had my business on the side. And I want to say it didn't feel like a hobby. It really felt like I was putting my heart fully into it. And I think what started to happen along the way is I started to feel this pull towards my business. I started to feel more of a pull towards my business. So it's not that I was pushed away from my work. I just felt more of a compelling pull. And what I think started, what I started to notice is being an entrepreneur, while in some ways it's harder than being a physician because it's me and I get to think about my business all the time,
Yeah.
I felt like I had so much more agency. I got to just call the shots of my life in a way that I never got to experience as a physician. In practice,
Mm,
I had to follow the office schedule. And if the office manager said, no, you're not allowed to have that day off, I had to basically say, okay. And there was a call schedule and I had to show up at the hospital at specific times. That I can go on around how administration and hospital policy and office policy dictated my responsibilities, my time, my work, my pay. And I didn't realize at the time how constricting that was. I just accepted it.
yeah.
But I think when I had the side by side, I started to see, wait a second, being an entrepreneur, following this dream actually might open up so much more for me. So, what would it look like if I leaned into that and trusted myself? And this was the hard part, trusting myself when I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know how it's going to go. Trusting myself to lead with that passion for coaching and knowing that if I missed being an OBGYN, if I missed practice, I would find a way back.
Yeah. Okay. I have so many like things that came up while you were saying that. But I mean, first off, I'm sure somebody who's listening to this is probably like, wait, how did you practice medicine alongside coaching and being a mom and, being a part of a community and like all the other things? Like, what
Yeah.
did that look like on the day to day?
So when I was doing both, being in practice and having a business, I had to be really cognizant of my time. So it wasn't like I was just working on Unstoppable 24/7 all times of the day. I was really deliberate around, when my kids are at school or when the nanny was with my daughter. These were the short periods of time that I got to focus and I worked with my clients. And then definitely in the evenings. So because I had both of these jobs, when my kids would go to bed, my husband might be watching some Netflix and I would be on my laptop, like tinkering with creating a website, like looking up YouTubing, like how to make your own website. And, everything was a DIY project for me at the time. So like, how do you figure this out? And because I wanted it so much, I think that drove me to work like that. I also don't think I could have sustained that type of work forever. But at the time, I was just so excited about the idea of what Unstoppable could be. I was so excited about the vision for it and my vision really for high achievers and working moms. I was like willing to just at night and on the weekends, like whenever the kids were napping or sleeping, little pockets of time was where I think I created a lot. And I also came in with the lens, if I have just a short period of time, I just focused on needle movers. So I didn't think about like, let me go print business cards. Like that was not a thing that was on my radar. I was like, let me focus on just the needle movers that really put my message in front of more people.
I like that phrase a lot because I think we all have that in our life. Like, even if somebody's listening to this and they don't, they're not like, okay, I want to go start my own business or anything like that. But just even focusing on the needle movers in your day to day life, because we're all limited on time. We all have the 24 hours a day. It can either seem abundant or scarce or anything like that. So for you, it sounds like that was really impactful just to like focus on the things that were going to move you forward.
Yeah.
Um, but like you just mentioned, this wasn't going to be sustainable forever. So like like move the needle all the way
Yeah.
to quitting practice and
Right.
going all in on your business.
So to be totally honest, when I was in it, I thought I could sustain it forever. Like when I first
Oh,
started,
of
I didn't
course
have
you did.
I didn't again, like I don't even know what I was thinking. Like I didn't have a 3-year plan or a 1-year plan. I had like a for now plan. I had like I would say like a 6-month plan. I'm like, this is gonna work for the next 6 months. But I didn't think really beyond that because again, I was so new to being an entrepreneur. I have like always had such an A, B, C, D step, like a stepwise protocol driven brain but I didn't think about the end. So the end was not in my mind at the time, but it was towards the end of 2021. I think it was like October, November of 2021 that I just started to notice in my practice, like specific circumstances came up where I was feeling extra constricted, being told no for things that I really wanted to do that felt like, through my lens, which I thought was fairly objective, but obviously it's not, it's subjective. But like, in my opinion, it felt like, some of my asks felt really, really fair. Some of my requests felt really thought out, and I was being told no for things that I really wanted to do. And that was when I was like, you know what? This is like, I wonder if this is just like me getting a signal for following something else. And I think it was that moment that I had a conversation with my husband, and it was just like, oh, I wonder what it would even look like to not practice. I had not even considered what would it even look like to not practice being a physician, because it had been part
Wow.
of my identity for so long. And I think just asking and answering that question, I just felt like my shoulders drop, my shoulders relax. And that was when I was like, you know what? I think that this is something I want to do. And I probably sat with the question for maybe a week, not that long. I didn't like sit and like dwell and ruminate and research on it, which I know that's a tendency that I've had in the past as a high achiever, researching all
Yeah.
things. But I was like, you know what? I am not going to do that. And I have to also say, because my husband's income really helped support our family too, that also made the decision much easier, that I wasn't the breadwinner for the family,
Mhm.
to lean into the decision more quickly. So I think that that's an important point too.
Yeah. Well, and I think a couple things. Like first, and I've seen this so much over the years, is I think there's this idea that like with coaching that like, oh, I can just coach myself to be totally fine working as a physician and also having this business on the side, which completely you can. But I think there's also a moment where you have to take a step back and be like, but does that make sense? Is that what do I want to coach myself around? What
Mhm.
could happen if I actually take the leap and go all in one direction or the other and see what happens? And
Yeah.
like, it sounds like that's what you like finally let yourself even just go there.
Yeah. And like what you're referring to, it's like, how do you know when to coach yourself on something and change your thoughts about your
Yes.
circumstances, which you can do anytime, any place, and to have a better life, which is true, versus how do you know when to change the circumstances? And I think that that comes from, there's like an inner intuition. I don't know that, and I can't believe I'm even saying this because I would never have said this a few years ago. Like, there's no protocol to know, because I know we all love a good protocol, but there's no protocol to know. How do you know when to make the change? I think that your intuition will guide you. The only thing that has ever gotten in the way of my own intuition is my brain, is like, me really trying to logic myself out of something that I'm feeling. And I think that that also, it comes with practice, practicing listening to your intuition, and then getting really familiar with that gut sense of like, am I making this decision out of fear? Am I making this decision out of trust? Am I making this decision out of love, out of confidence? Where is this decision coming from? And if it didn't work out, this was the conversation I had to have. If it doesn't work out, what will be my agreement with myself?
Mm.
What will be my agreement with myself? How will I talk to myself if it doesn't work out? How will I be with myself? Will I have my own back? Like, how will I treat myself effectively, if this was like the quote unquote wrong decision? And I think that me making the decision that I will have my own back, even if it was a total fail, I think that that was also really important.
Oh, I think that's such an important part. I mean, it's such an important point altogether because so many people I talk to, it's just like, well, how will I know if it's going to be the right decision? And what if I hate the decision? It's like, you might to both. Like, you might,
Yeah.
you're never going to know. It's just a decision that you make that you just decide, like, I'm just going to go in this direction. It's going to be the right decision for me. But
Yeah.
I relate so much to what you're saying because when I left my job last year, I think it was a year ago, it was kind of the same thing where it was just like, I don't absolutely hate this.
Hmm.
I just feel more drawn to like pulled towards something, and it was like a gut check on that. And I think if we're all honest and like not honest, but if you look for it, it's there. If you're
Hmm.
open to seeing it, it's just that like sometimes when we look, we're kind of scared though, because it's like, oh my gosh, I have to take action right away. No,
Right.
we don't necessarily. You
Yeah.
could just look and know. And for you, it was like kind of sounds like within a short span of time. You decided to take the leap, but you could also wait time.
I think it like the time piece, it's like it could take a day, it could take a year. I mean, and the time is like, again, that's just a circumstance that we put a lot of like we overvalue time a lot. And I think it comes at a cost. The more we overvalue time, we stop making decisions, which is the real reason that things take more time. So it's a little bit of this like kind of catch 22. It's like, what comes first, the chicken or the egg type of thing. But what I have found, at least in my work with high achievers, and this was my story as well, is we're a little addicted to the feeling of certainty. We really want to feel certainty before we make a decision. And our desire for the certainty, like our desire to feel so sure, is the reason we feel uncertain. And so it's what I think for me, what it's the way I think about it is like if I'm holding this really charged stick and one side is uncertain and the other side is certain, and I'm like trying to feel certain, it's just never going to happen because I don't have the crystal ball. So the visual that I often think about is like, what would it feel like for me to just put the stick down? And what if that wasn't a part of my equation? Like uncertainty or certainty is like not even a part of this conversation I'm having. Let me just put the stick down and then move forward, because it's that addiction to the certainty that I think keeps us stalled for so long. Not just, and this is with weight loss, this is as a parent, this is with work life, this is with making an unconventional choice too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I imagine that even just somebody hearing you say that
Mm.
of like, oh, you felt uncertain
Yeah.
and you made the decision anyway to go forward. I think it's reassuring when we hear each other's stories
Yeah.
about like, yeah, I was filled with doubt and uncertainty and all these things. Because to be honest, like you'll feel those things and then you'll take the leap and you'll still feel those things. And it doesn't mean that you
Exactly.
made the wrong decision. It just means that you're a
Yeah.
human doing like scary things that seem scary and you're growing and you're out of your comfort zone. And like, of course you're feeling those things.
Yeah. And also like when you really think about, well, if you think about the last time that you did something that didn't work out, like the last time you made a mistake or like the made whatever, the quote unquote wrong decision, it didn't pan out, like you're here right now. You clearly figured something out. So that I think is the part of like the having your own back piece. Like even if this wasn't the right decision, I would figure it out then. Like, I think we as humans, and I think especially women really do this where we doubt, we want the certainty so much because we forget, wait a second, but I always figure it out. Even if it didn't work out, I still figure it out. So that's the piece that I think is an important sentence to attach to any decision. But like I always will figure it out, even if it didn't work out.
Yeah, I love that absolutely because I think what we forget too is like, okay, you made the decision to become a physician and then you pivoted to like coaching moms. And if you decided like, okay, not this, maybe there's a piece of medicine that comes in, maybe there's a piece of coaching and then it's the next thing. I think we think
Mhm.
it's like a full stop. If I fail at this and I got to go start over someplace else, maybe that's the answer, or maybe it's an iteration on the thing that you've just done. And now you've learned all these things. And it's not like you
Absolutely.
forget
Yeah.
them. You
Oh yeah,
have them.
you don't forget it. I think that the one, hiccup that did come up for me was, and not just my parents, but I think anyone that was like, wait a second, what are you doing? You're like not going to be a physician anymore. You're going to be a what? A coach? What's that? What does that mean? And I think really interacting with and engaging with people in my life, like friends and family in my life, I think that was probably one of the hardest pieces of the transition personally, because I have always felt like a little bit of a people pleaser, at least like I have been for years and less so now, but it's like I wanted to please my parents. I wanted to please my like the people in my life. And I think that that's another thing that has also held me back. Like if I fail, what if they were right and I made this mistake, this idea of feeling embarrassed or ashamed that like I made this huge mistake and I should have done what they said, like my parents or friends and family. And I think that that's the part also that I wasn't aware of before coaching. I think I just thought these were my own thoughts, not that I was borrowing the thoughts of the people around me and what they believed I should be doing, what was possible for me. I think that was important to parse out.
Yeah. Well, tell me the story about like talking to your parents about deciding that you're going to leave medicine and like pursue
Yeah.
coaching full time? Like, what was that
So
like?
I think in the beginning when I started Unstoppable, it was like, oh, cool, that's exciting because I was still
Right.
practicing. So I was like, oh,
Yeah.
amazing. That's a beautiful website. Like that's like, like my mom and my dad is like so into this. Like he's like following me. He's doing all kinds of funny things. And then, it was at the end of 2021, I was like, so I'm planning on leaving. And I remember my mom especially was like, so are you sure? Like maybe you want to pick up a couple of locums shifts. Maybe you want to like keep a toe. And I totally understand her point. Like her intention, which is coming from a place of her way of loving me, is like, make sure you don't forget how to be an OBGYN, right? So like keep your toe in the water, and I get it. And also, I think at the same time, I just knew that that wasn't for me. So I feel like it was probably really hard for her to offer that. And I was like, yeah, no, mom, I'm not doing that. Like, I can just imagine because I'm a mom. I can imagine if I have a really strong opinion with my children and they're like, yeah, I'm not doing that. I can imagine how it must have felt for her. But I was really fortunate because both of my parents are very supportive. And despite them giving me their advice, like despite them being like, I don't know if this is a good idea, like they do come around. So I think it was a very interesting experience, but I especially think it was hard for her.
Yeah. Well, how
Yeah.
was it for you to hear that? Like,
Yeah. I
yeah.
think, it definitely made me have a little flicker of doubt. By little, I mean a big flicker of doubt. Like,
Yeah.
oh, like, my mom, this person that I know, love, and trust, who has known me forever, she's telling me to do this, like to keep my toe in the water, to stay in practice. And I think that it did make me doubt, like, am I doing the right thing? And like, maybe I shouldn't do it this way. Maybe I should do what she's telling me to do. And I think the reason I didn't was because the belief that won out was she doesn't really understand what I'm trying to do. That's
Mm.
all it was. She didn't understand the vision that I had. And I think that, from her scope of what she understands, it made sense. Her opinion made sense. But I was like, it's okay for her to not know. And
Mm.
I do. So that was kind of how the whole
Yeah.
decision panned out.
What about other people in your life, that maybe weren't so close to things? It sounds like that your parents were following along on your journey, knew what
Mhm.
you were up to along the way. They'd been brought along, but like,
Yeah.
what about other people?
I think that friends, and I don't know, maybe if they were just like being kind, or maybe it was genuine. It's hard to say because I feel like sometimes even in friendships, like we want to be the supportive friend. We don't want to say the thing that's going to like offend the friend. But I feel like I definitely had some conversations around like, wait, what are you doing? Wait, why? What that make like a little bit of like that doesn't make sense, kind of like what my mom's perspective was. But I will say for the most part that my friends have been supportive. I think even if they don't understand, that I think is kind of what I'm taking away from the close relationships that I've had, is even if they don't fully understand, I think generally they might ask a couple of questions, or they might be a little bit confused. They might not even know, like, wait, what is coaching again? What are you doing exactly? Do you miss being a physician? Do you miss practicing? I get that question a lot, especially from like my OBGYN buddies. Like, do you miss being in the OR? Do you miss seeing patients? And the answer is yes and yes. And I
Mm.
just love this more, right? So I think that has been one half of it. The other half, and this was a surprising piece, is how many of my friends have been so inspired by
Ah.
me leaving, being like me leaving me leaving practice and starting my own thing. That was surprising to me. How many of they're like, I cannot believe that you did this thing. It is so amazing. I wish I could do it.
Why do you think that was surprising to you?
I I don't know. I think I just was so in the camp of the first one. Like, am I doing the right thing? This is such a huge deal. I'm like, physician was my identity for so long
Yeah.
that I don't think I've ever thought anything that I do is inspiring. I'm like,
Mm.
I mean, who am I to be inspiring? Like, I think I've had such, I used to have such not little opinion of myself, but I didn't think of myself as someone that was doing anything inspiring. I was like, I'm just following what feels right. And so I think that's what it was. I was like, is it inspiring? But I can see once they share their thoughts with me, I can see why it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think people also have to be open to being inspired
Mhm.
because if your friends were immediately judgmental of you, they would block that part of themselves that maybe secretly wants to do something a little bit different too. Because
Mhm.
it's like, it's almost protective to judge somebody and just being like, what are they doing? Why didn't
Oh
she
yeah.
stay in medicine? This is crazy.
Yeah.
But that to me says that like you're surrounded by people who, if they're not doing it already, they're secretly wanting to.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's like you just went first.
Yeah. I think that that's what it is. And I do think that if there were any people in my life that had the judgment or any of those kinds of thoughts, then it's kind of one of those things where, you know, how friendships just change over time. And this is just true, I think, of all of us as we grow. But I think major events like this might reveal themselves more quickly, like they reveal themselves in relationships more quickly. And I think it just is important to remember that every relationship evolves. It doesn't mean like a friendship has broken or a relationship has broken, it's just evolved. And that I think is just growing in general. I think that that might have happened anyway, but I was fortunate to have people surrounding me be fairly supportive.
Yeah. Well, and like um that's the part where it's just like you lean into those people, right? You just like surround yourself, keep surrounding yourself with those people. What was coming up for you as you were thinking about quitting? And I imagine that your contract at work probably required you to stay maybe longer than you would have wanted to. But, you know, like what was coming up for you as you're making that transition?
I mean, I still remember the call. Like I texted the senior partner, I was like, can we get on a call today? And so we had like a little group Zoom call. And I was just like crying. Oh, it was so, I mean, unprofessional. I don't know. This is I wear my heart in my sleeve. So I was just crying because I felt sad, I think, about leaving. And there was definitely grief with it too. So for me, there was two pieces. One was I felt sad and grief at this idea of not practicing anymore and like, am I
Yeah.
really saying no to this big part of my life and my identity? And then I also had this like desire to just like stop. Now that I have decided, I want to just like be able to move forward and like go all in. Um, and just be 100% with my business. But yeah, there was like, I forget if it was like 90 days, 60 days. There was like some amount of time
Yeah.
that I stayed on. And I, even after the fact, was like, you know, I'm happy to come in, I'm happy to help out because again, we didn't leave, you know, from my side. I never felt like we left in a negative way. So, you know, but it was a tough time because I felt this dichotomy of sadness and grief, but this excitement to be moving on. And I think that that sadness still comes up every now and then where I'm like, oh, I still kind of miss
Mm.
certain pieces of that life, but it's okay to feel sad about some of that stuff because I enjoy this more.
Yeah. Well, and I think like that's such a normal part of life. It's like places you used to live or like, you know, single life before you had kids or something. You know, like there's always going to be pieces where it's like, man, that part of it.
Mhm.
I didn't hate that part. I kind of love it. Kind of wish that was back again. But yeah, I love this more.
And just familiarity also, it's like that wasn't enough of a reason for me to stay. That
Yeah.
and that's something I'm learning even in my business. Just because something feels familiar or it's, you know, something that I've done for a long time, it doesn't mean that it's the best thing for me right now. And that I think was a lesson I didn't know of before becoming an entrepreneur. Becoming
Can
an
you say
entrepreneur,
more
it's
about
like
that? Yeah.
it's yeah, I think that I becoming an entrepreneur, the part that has been the biggest personal growth for me is there is no right way. There is no protocol. There's no A, B, C, D, E step, which is what I usually love. I love a good protocol. It's been this like playground. You go and play on the playground and like there's no rules. You just kind of go out there, you put your mission and your vision out into the world and you test a lot of things. You see what works, what doesn't work. You make tweaks on what's not working and then you try again and you iterate again. And that has required me because I think of myself as a fairly rigid and stubborn person, it's required me to learn flexibility. It's required me to challenge my perfectionism. I have a lot of these like very all or nothing, you know, perfectionist thoughts. Like I did my best. I don't know if I can ever be better than that. And all becoming an entrepreneur has forced me to challenge all of that. And now the way that I think about my business and then by proxy now my life is if I was just in a growth mindset, if every single thing, every circumstance in my life was just an opportunity for me to grow, that means I can, like, there's nothing that has to be static and constant unless I want it to be. So I think that statics and like things that are constant in my life have been familiar. So, like, for example, if I'm using a certain platform, if I've worked with a certain team, or if I've run my business in a certain way, it feels really comfortable for me. But then really evaluating, but is this working or is it not working? Am I willing to feel uncomfortable and unfamiliar as I challenge what's not working? I think that that's been hard for me, but also the best growth for me.
Yeah. How do you know when something's not working?
I think that it just depends on defining, it's all results based. So if I, and the hard thing is defining what is a result. Like, for example, with weight loss, one way of defining, am I getting results, is the pounds on the scale, right? That's just like
Mhm.
one metric. But there's probably 10 ways of quantifying and defining results: percent body fat, how your clothes fit, how your body feels, maybe how heavy or light your gut is, right? So you can go on and define what are the results that you want. So that's how I know when something's not working. It's when I look at results that I've previously defined and I have a regular interval to evaluate them. So now in my
Yeah.
business, and I never had this before. I never had this before in my life in general. I never was evaluating my life. I
Yeah.
was just living my life. I was just kind of going through. But now I have like a weekly, monthly, quarterly, and yearly kind of audit for what are the results that I created this quarter. Is it what I wanted? Was this a part of my goal for this quarter? Did I hit it? And it's coming through the lens of complete curiosity. So there's no judgment or embarrassment or shame. It's like, did I hit my goals this quarter? What was it that worked? What didn't work? Why? I wonder what created the delta here. Was it because I was wasting too much time scrolling on Instagram? Or like, was it because, right? So like, what was it? And then just be willing to make small tweaks.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it really redefines failure because if
Mhm.
it didn't work, it doesn't mean that you failed at it. It's just, oh, I thought this was going to be the result.
Mhm.
I thought this was the amount of effort that it would take or the approach that it would take, and that didn't get me
Yeah.
the result. Do I still
Yeah.
want this result? And if I do,
Yeah.
what's for the next quarter, the next
And
month,
this
the
is
next
the,
week?
I would say that the failure piece is the biggest thing that holds, I think, all humans back. This idea, and this is again, especially with high achieving women, it's this, well, that was my best and I failed, or like I tried and I failed. And that implies that your best is not betterable. What most people
Oh,
forget is that was my best. And if we kept going and took quitting off the table, my best is always betterable, because humans are just designed to keep growing and learning. So if we stopped quitting and we kept iterating and learning and growing, just imagine what would happen to the result line. Like it has to
yeah.
skyrocket. Like it's impossible for it to not.
Yeah.
This is a big thing, especially for, for my clients, and I specifically coach in weight loss. I see this happen all the time. And this was me. So I totally get it. It's like, well, I've tried this. Or like you have like, maybe on a weekend binge, or you forget yourself on vacation, you come back 2 pounds heavy. When you have the thought, like, see, there I go again. See, I failed again. It just reveals to me as a coach, like, oh, you think that that's your best and that it's not betterable. So it helps to really direct the coaching, right? When we are like, oh, you're just thinking that your result is fixed. No wonder
Right.
you're not hitting goals, because you have this relationship with results, rather than if you stopped
Yeah.
quitting, it's just inevitable.
Yeah. Like if quitting isn't an option and
Yep.
it's just, you just have this idea of yourself right now
Yeah.
that this is your best. You just don't know
Yeah.
if, unless you keep going just to see if there's a different approach there. I mean, you'll find it. And that's what kind of what you've been saying all along is just like everything is figure outable. Like you're going to figure it out if you just keep going.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. I was thinking like around the last question, what advice would you give somebody who is considering taking a leap into the unknown, doing something unconventional, changing their life?
Yeah. I actually think about reverse engineering
Mm,
this question. So if you flashed forward 10 years from now, what decision would you be so grateful that you made? And once you kind of ask yourself, what would I be so grateful for having made? Which decision would I be more grateful for? Then you get to ask yourself, what emotion would ever get in the way of me creating that? And am I willing to feel that feeling? I think that that is the way that I operate now when I'm in the middle of a scary, it feels, feels scary, right? There's like some fear around this unknown or this big decision, especially if you're going from something that's conventional to not, to just flash forward. I feel like our future selves have so much wisdom that we forget about. That's like, wait a second, 10 years from now, what would be my dream life? What would be my dream decision? Forget 10 years, 1 year from now, what would be such a dream for me? What will I be so grateful for? Am I willing to feel uncomfortable right now to make that a reality, and then be willing to feel that discomfort?
Yeah. Well, and I think it's like by asking yourself that question, you flash forward, the stakes are lower because you're like, oh, I'm already there.
Yeah.
It's like the pressure is off. You can kind of imagine that space. What would it be like? And then you're like, okay, well, what's the roadmap to get there? It's like, it's almost like you've created a safe space for yourself to think about your future.
And you can see how you made it happen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's like, well, and like, how did we make it happen? What were the decisions we made? What did we say yes to? More importantly, what did we say no to? I think that's the big one. What did we say no to make this happen? And it's like our if we just took a moment to dream about that, I think there's so much wisdom there that it is kind of like a roadmap on like how to create the results that you want.
Yeah. Well, and I think that was interesting about one of the things that you had mentioned either on this call or before ahead of time is like there's no defined pathway to being an entrepreneur or doing something very different than what you're doing right now. And so it's like by doing what you just suggested, fast forwarding to the future, you create your own roadmap that's actually like uniquely tailored to you and what you know about yourself versus somebody else's idea of what you should do. So it's like if you can have some trust in yourself to follow that path, it's like you're not going to lead yourself astray.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, Pri, is there anything else I didn't ask you about today that was on your mind that you feel like people should know?
I think that we covered a lot of it. I kind of want to just leave with saying that anything is possible. I think if you're capable of imagining it, it means that it's possible to become your reality. If it was not possible, I don't think that we would have been able to dream it. So I think that that's an important point to remember. If you're dreaming about something, it means it's possible. We just have to kind of go for it and get it.
Yeah, I love that. If somebody wanted to find you online, where would they go?
I am the Unstoppable Mom Brain everywhere on the internet. That's my podcast. It's me on Instagram, and that's my website. So yeah, I love sharing stories, especially I think storytelling, as I was telling you before, we even started
Yeah,
recording on my podcast. And I think that that's probably where I have the most fun is my podcast and Instagram.
that is awesome. Well, I will have everything in the show notes for everyone to find. And Pri, thanks for coming on the show today. I really appreciate the conversation and catching up with you.
This was so fun. Thanks for having
Yeah,
me.
thanks. Hey, friend. Thank you for listening to today's conversation. If you're considering any major career or lifestyle change and you want to talk to someone about this, I am here for you. You can learn how to work with me one-on-one on my website, lynngrogan.com, and I'll also have details in the show notes. See you next time on the Courageously Unconventional podcast.